Good morning.
Hello. I'm only going to say hello once instead of hello, hello.
Hello, hello, works. Good morning. We've made it before the morning this time. That's exciting. Or before the
Just
morning.
barely, unless our Israel viewers are watching right now, in which case it is.
Yes. Erev Tov to our Israelis watching.
Uh,
What's new this week with you, Benyamin?
I'm still getting used to the daylight savings time. Saving or
Mm,
savings? I think it's savings with an S.
yeah, not sure.
Um, I'm getting used to DST, as they
Yeah,
say in the lingo. Um, when you live, a lot of my daily life is run by animals.
I was
Taking
gonna
care of.
say, yeah,
So the actual when sunset is actually makes a difference and changes my, my schedule as far as doing chickens to bed and things like that. So
makes
I'm
sense.
still
How
still
early
getting
do
used to it.
chickens get up? Do I want to
Uh,
know?
the chickens get up. Basically, they're awake during sunrise. When it's light outside. So nowadays they do sleep a little later, which is fine. The rooster is not waking me up,
That's good.
so I can't complain. What's going on with you?
Well, I'm doing a last minute trip to Philly this afternoon,
Oh
just
wow.
for a day to see a friend. If anyone has any Philly suggestions, the only time I've really been, despite being born outside of Philly, was to run the marathon. So I've seen a very specific 26 miles of the city. So if anyone has any suggestions, feel free to
As
drop
far
them.
as like where, yeah, put in the comments if you have suggestions. I know Zahav is like the
Yeah,
most famous
I
kosher
know.
restaurant there, or
I
Jewish
tried
restaurant.
to get a last minute reservation, and alas, I think they book up very far in advance.
So the chef there, Michael Salmonov, the Israeli chef, he has a bunch of restaurants because he's from Philly, I think. So he has a
Yeah,
bunch of restaurants there. Maybe you could get into one of the other ones.
yeah, I'll try after our recording. But I also
You need,
discovered
yeah.
non-alcoholic tequila, and so that has been a nice treat. I'm drinking like a non-alcoholic tequila soda at 11:45. So
So what makes it tequila then?
it vaguely tastes of aromatics and whatever
It's like
spices.
Fresca.
No, it's not sweet. It's not sweet. So I guess it's kind of like the same idea as bitters, but they add water and make it 4 times the price. So I'm enjoying that we live in this century that has weird stuff like that.
Oh,
So
speaking of which, my wife's gonna make fun of me, but I only got into drinking during the pandemic. I really didn't drink alcohol before then, and so I'm not like I don't like the taste of beer or wine or anything like that. But so I've tried to get into whiskey, and one of the I've got into the flavored whiskeys basically. So
mm.
I my new favorite is salted caramel whiskey,
Oh, that's
which
really flavored, Benjamin.
that's really what.
That's really flavored. You're like
That
the
is flavored.
Starbucks coffee drinkers that say, "I love coffee. I get the peppermint praline macchiato with 10 pumps of vanilla syrup." Yeah, okay,
I shouldn't tell you. Then sometimes I mix it with soda.
amazing. Hey, whatever does it for you.
Yeah, so let's get into the news of the week. It's been,
Crazy,
it never
crazy.
seems to be a quiet week of Jewish news.
Definitely
Um,
not.
there's been a
Yeah,
lot. I think we really can't ignore what's going on 6,000 miles away in Israel. The headline that caught my attention this morning in our newsletter was Israeli President Isaac Herzog warned of the possibility of civil war.
yeah.
Um,
It's kind of wild. I mean, our colleague Jacob Kornblue is on the ground reporting,
yeah.
and he told us yesterday that he thought that might be slightly hyperbolic. It is kind of crazy. I mean, Bushi Herzog is known as a measured, thoughtful, politically savvy guy. I was kind of surprised to see such a strong statement, but I mean, I guess it's also he's been pushing for a compromise, so I guess using stronger language is going to help his case a little bit. But no, it's just been nuts. I mean, all of my friends who are there are out protesting, um, or just like feeling like everything is so surreal. What are you thinking and hearing?
I mean, the news out of Israel, you're always on DEFCON 3. No, even whether even obviously, now is, I think, obviously a little more elevated than usual, but it's a place where there's constant war and there's constant, there's elections every few months, and so it's hard, I think, for American Jews to calibrate what's going on there. And I agree with you. I think this is a very, the country is at a crossroads right now, so to speak. But because there's always such a flood of news coming out of Israel, big and small, sometimes I think it could be hard for our readers here in the States to kind of grasp whether or not or how important something is.
Right. I mean, also because the change is not necessarily going to be felt immediately, right? What they're debating is basically significantly reducing the power of the judicial system. And yes, we see all the protests and see, the downgrading of Israeli investments and things like that. But the average American Jew is not necessarily going to feel the direct impact if these changes go through immediately. So I think it's also hard for folks to wrap their heads around whether or not there's going to be an actual impact.
Right. We keep using the term judicial overhaul, in our articles, and it's such a nebulous term for people who are not in the know. So I've been trying instead to write things like this plan would neuter the Supreme Court, for example, which maybe some people can relate to. Speaking of the Supreme Court, I want to get your take on, last year when the United States Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. So ton of protests, front page news every day, people out in the streets protesting. But it's a year later, and we live in a new reality where Roe v. Wade is overturned, and you don't see people, protesting every day in the street. Do you think, like, Benjamin Netanyahu and the people in his coalition government are like, okay, let people protest, we'll pass this law, and a year from now, no one's going to remember it?
Yeah, I think people are counting on it. I mean, I do think a lot of, as we get closer to the next presidential election, I do think there will be another big push on abortion as like a talking point. But I mean, I think Netanyahu and his coalition are counting on the fact that there's so much going on in the world right now, and people's memories are short and their attention spans are short. So, I mean, yeah, life did fundamentally change for a lot of people who live in red states after the fall of Roe. But there's just so much other stuff going on all the time that it's very easy to get distracted by other things. So
I was just sorry.
I was just going to say, I think Netanyahu is also counting on the fact that, Israelis, like most other people, most people just want to live their lives and get on with things. And, the protests have momentum now, but I don't think it's sustainable for a long period of time. So I think he's counting on the fatigue. And he kind of doesn't really have a choice if he doesn't want to go to prison other than, passing these things that would remove accountability. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, we like on our little Thursday chats here to talk about a variety of news and then invite a guest. And we have a really special guest coming on later. The next news item I wanted to bring up, I saw this. There's, people who follow the Grammy Awards. This week we had the Oscars, but before that we had the Grammys. And there's Grammys for all sorts of categories, rock album, pop album, hip-hop album. But there's also Grammys for Best Gospel Album, Best Contemporary Christian Album. And there was a couple Jewish artists, Jewish musicians, who started a petition saying, we want our Jewish music to be represented here as well. And so they were hoping to maybe get a new category added to the Grammys. What did you think about that?
I mean, I should add the caveat that I am not the pop culture guru on staff by any stretch of the imagination. But just at first glance, like, there's 210 million Christians in the United States. There's like a teeny fraction of the country is Jewish. So I don't know that there's like enough. What is Shweki gonna be like winning a Grammy Award now? Like that? What's happening?
Yeah. I would
Don't
also
get me
say
wrong,
like
I love Shweki, but it's I don't know. There might be other categories that Jewish music fits better into, or maybe just having a religious music category in general. Like one of the things I enjoy most about TikTok actually is there's a lot of Gen Z creators from different faith and cultural backgrounds who like remix their culture's music and share it and get hype for their first album on TikTok. So maybe we just need a new category entirely that is more, I don't know if they have like a world music category or something.
I think they do. Yeah, I think they do. It's also just a sheer numbers game. I mean, there, like you said, there are many more Christians. There are many more people listening to Christian music. And so let's say you have, pulling a number out of my hat here. Let's say you have 10 million people listening to Christian music and, 1 million people listening to Jewish music. So, okay, it's understandable why they would get the Grammy categories and we would not.
I mean, also, it's not like Jews never win Grammys, just not for,
that's true.
For Jewish specific music. But I mean, I think Leonard Cohen's music is pretty Jewish, and he's, he won several Grammys.
Right. You could argue, it's a good point. You could argue that it's almost more meaningful if a Jewish artist wins in a mainstream category than in a Jewish category.
Right. I think the less we silo our culture and ourselves. I mean, it's an interesting question, though, because most American Jewish contributions to music in America have been like Jews writing Christmas songs, Jews writing like not religious music for general audiences. So, I mean, I think people that do write specifically Jewish, specifically spiritual or culturally Jewish music, maybe there is a point that there needs to be a better forum for celebrating and highlighting that.
Best Yiddish album of the year. Speaking of music, there was another story that caught my eye this morning. Was Roger Waters? He's one of the co-founders of Pink Floyd. Yes. He's famously has said a lot of anti-Israel rhetoric. Some people would say anti-Semitic. That's a conversation that's a different conversation. Anti-Zionism versus anti-Semitism.
Today. Yeah.
But so he had scheduled some concerts in, of all places, Germany, in Frankfurt and Munich, I think, and the cities said, we don't want you performing here. They canceled the concerts. And he is taking legal action. He called the move unconstitutional, and he's hired a team of lawyers to potentially sue the cities.
Okay. I mean, look, like Europe has much more restrictive speech laws, for better, for worse. A lot of people that work on anti-Semitism in Europe are kind of baffled by how free our free speech is here. It sounds like a silly controversy. I mean, I think private institutions are allowed to bar people. The city canceling it. I mean, Germany does have pretty strong anti-Semitism laws. They feel bad about the Holocaust and strengthened their legislation significantly since then. I have trouble getting worked up about like wealthy people having minor inconveniences. I don't know. It seems like an interesting test of whether or not this will stand in European law. But beyond that, I mean, pick a hobby, Roger Waters. That's not yelling about Jews. Like, I don't know. Just he did the only thing he's been in the news for in the last several years is like Israel related.
Right.
Who else?
Right.
Go to Israel, go protest instead of yelling about it in Europe, Like, go be at the heart of what's happening.
Yeah. Let's do one more story before we have our guest on. This is just a fun little news story to end on our new segment on. Do you watch The Bachelor or The Bachelorette, Laura?
No, that is not my guilty pleasure of choice. But do you watch The Bachelor, Benyamin?
Surprisingly, no. I watch just about every other dating reality show. I watch every iteration of 90 Day Fiancé, every iteration of Married at First Sight. we can talk about this in a future episode, but there's a Jewish dating show coming to Netflix in May, and they just sent me last night a
Oh
sneak peek of the episodes.
gosh, that sounds like a mess and a half.
But my guilty pleasure 100% is dating reality shows, but for some reason I don't know. For some reason I never got into The Bachelor, which is I know the OG, the original dating show. But there are 3 contestants left for anyone who's not following the current season 27, I think. There are 3 contestants left, and one of them is a Jewish girl named Ariel Frankel. She's a Ukrainian Jew, and the family lives in New York now. And, at the end of the season, each season, the Bachelor goes to the hometown of each the final contestants, and he meets their family and sees what life is like in their hometowns. And so he went to New York in this week's episode to visit Ariel's hometown. And, the producers sent them to a Jewish deli so that the Bachelor could get a real taste of what it's like to be Jewish in America. And she was trying to introduce him to different foods. And I've never seen this before, like a romantic date that involved gefilte fish, but she was serving him gefilte fish, and he was like, this is delicious.
First of all, there's nothing less believable than that. Second of all,
Right.
There's nothing less romantic than gefilte fish. Yeah, no. It's hard. I struggle to think of something. That is, it's just so like kitschy. I don't know. It's so classic. Like go to Veselka or something if you're a Ukrainian Jew. Don't like pick the stereotypical deli, but it's all right.
It does speak though to the lazy stereotypes that reality shows and television in general use. It's like, religious Jew. Anytime you see Jewish characters on a show, they're wearing a black hat and they have payas, and they never show or rarely show a typical, Reform Jew or a typical modern Orthodox Jew.
Yeah, totally.
All right, so that is our news roundup. Now we're going to move on to our guest for today's episode. Our guest, let me bring her on, is Maharat Rory Picker Neiss. Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah, you did.
Still loading.
Oh, am I here?
Yeah, I see you. I see you here. So the reason we wanted to have you on, you are the executive director of the Jewish Community Relations Council of St. Louis. Mm-hmm. You're Maharat. For those people who don't know, is that a lot of people would say that's a female rabbi, or is that not the way to look at it?
Yeah, you can describe it that way. So I'm ordained to be clergy, and specifically use this different title, acknowledging the different role that women have played in the Orthodox community historically.
Mm-hmm. And the reason we wanted to have you on is because we've all been following in the news recently a lot of these trans bills that are being passed in different states, trying to ban gender-affirming medical treatments. And most recently, Missouri is coming out with at least 31 bills, I think the largest of any state in the country, and they have a Republican supermajority, and it looks like, this may... I don't think it hasn't passed yet, right?
Not yet. The bills have passed. Yeah. Most of the bills have passed out of committee, but not out of the Senate or the House yet.
And you've been featured, because I know you've been protesting this, and you have a personal connection. I'm wondering if you could speak to that.
So we've been fighting these bills in Missouri now for 4 years, and I have been doing it both on behalf of the Jewish community through my work, but also personally as a parent of a trans child. And my son has come with me since he was 8 years old to testify against these bills.
What's at stake in Missouri specifically for trans youth if these bills pass?
So I want to emphasize that what's at stake in Missouri is very similar to what is at stake in other states as well. And there's a number of things. When you talk about gender-affirming healthcare, we're talking about access to healthcare. So gender-affirming healthcare could be anything from doctors being willing to talk to kids about being trans, supporting them through using the appropriate names, talking about what that could look like as they get older. So I want to also be really clear that people sometimes are thinking that we're talking about banning surgeries, and that's not all that we're talking about. So when kids start to hit puberty, usually the first step is to give them puberty blockers, which would enable kids to delay puberty, specifically for the purpose of having more time to then make these decisions and to not then develop in a body that feels like the wrong body to them. And then ultimately to later on go on hormones of the gender that they are. Those are also at stake. And so when we start talking about specifically teens, we're talking about forcing kids to go through these body changes and to become more and more like the gender that they are in, right? So whether or not we're talking about trans girls who then would get deeper voices and grow facial hair, trans boys who would develop breasts, all of these are the things that we're trying to avoid happening so that our kids are able to feel secure in who they are. And this is where we know that there's so much data about self-harm and attempts at taking one's own life, specifically within the trans community and among trans youth. But I want to say that there's more than just the healthcare. The healthcare is sometimes the scariest piece, but there's so many other bills right now that are in Missouri and in other states that are specifically trying to ban kids from playing sports except on the gender that they were assigned at birth, or prohibiting drag performances. And all of those are scary to me, not necessarily because they have a direct impact. In Missouri, there's currently about 5 trans kids playing sports. So across the state, if they ban that, it's not going to have a huge implication other than those 5 people on a practical level, but it has an implication on the entire community because we're talking about the most powerful people in the state deciding that they could codify discrimination against a single group of people. And that has huge ramifications on the trans community as a whole, but also on any one of us that identifies as a minority.
Yeah, I was going to ask, so many of these bills that we're seeing, whether it's trans bills or, I mean, we report on stuff every day at the Forward that are what I would call, religiously motivated, Christian ideology. The state legislatures, even the Supreme Court, we were talking earlier in the episode about overturning Roe v. Wade, that, these lawmakers are Christian and they are doing this because this is their belief. And, I don't know how they square that when the whole point of, living in America is being in a country that's free to practice any religion.
Well, some of our lawmakers don't agree with that. I mean, we have lawmakers in Missouri who have gotten up on the House floor and said, I don't care about separation of church and state. This is what God calls me to do. And I appreciate that you raised that up because in Missouri, a number of the bill's sponsors are also pastors. Many of them talk about their religious affiliation as part of the basis for these laws. And a lot of the people who testify in support also use their faith in that. But we've also seen a huge mobilization of faith leaders on the other side. We've had a significant number of rabbis, ministers, and others who have really joined in the conversation to say that's not what we think that God wants. That's not what the Bible says. We believe that, yes, God creates every person in God's image, and that's a wide diversity of what that could look like, including the trans experience. So we're seeing a big pushback of people who are trying to reclaim religious language precisely because of what you're describing.
Yeah.
I'm curious also to hear what the reaction has been like within both your specific Orthodox community and the wider Orthodox world in which you exist to both your family's personal challenges figuring this out for your own family, but also to the work that you've been doing. Orthodoxy obviously doesn't have like a super friendly pro-trans rights history. So I would love to hear a little bit more about what your personal experience has been like with that.
So the truth is that I've been really surprised because overwhelmingly we've been getting a lot of support. Maybe some of the other people are good enough to just stay quiet and not reach out to us directly. Given the internet, I would like most people, I don't think are smart enough to usually keep their opinions to themselves in situations like this. Twitter proves otherwise, but
Yeah.
we've really the community that we're in, the congregation that we're a part of, has really embraced our family. I mean, we were there before my son transitioned, and then still throughout. We're navigating right now what his bar mitzvah is going to look like, and I don't totally know where that's going to be, but we're in the conversation, which is more than I can say about some other places that we could be. I've had a lot of people. I mean, I'm in St. Louis now. I grew up in New York, in Brooklyn, and, people that I went to high school with who have been reaching out to me since our story really went public, just to express their support, how proud they are, how much they want to have our back. My parents keep telling me that they have old neighbors and friends who have been reaching out to say that they saw the report and that they are supportive. So we really have been embraced with love. And I think that this is often the situation. Look, I had this when I first decided to go to Yeshivat Maharat and to be a woman studying for ordination. It was also hugely controversial within the Orthodox community. And what I found was that people had really strong opinions about it as an idea. And then people would say, oh, but Rory, that makes sense. There was a very different relationship that I think people have when you actually start to get to somebody that they know, and especially if it's somebody that they care about. And so
Right.
I feel really lucky because we have a lot of people who know us and who care about us and who have decided to stick with us.
What do you tell? How do you explain to your son what's going on in the state legislature?
So he's been with us kind of every step of the way. And when we first started going to testify, it was the sports bills and there were some of the healthcare bills, but there really wasn't as much teeth. I mean, now it's kind of exploded with the drag bills, the Don't Say Gay bills, the Parents' Bill of Rights. What teachers can teach in schools, attempts to ban books from the library. We've had a situation here in Missouri also where the Secretary of State invited comments about whether or not to defund libraries that were allowing books that were not considered age appropriate. And some of that started because during Pride Month, there was a display in libraries of children's books that showed two dads or LGBTQ life. And there were parents who felt like that was not age appropriate material and therefore started this campaign. So it has definitely really exploded in the past year. But I mean, he's been listening to the testimony. He's heard it the whole way through. And frankly, he just thinks everyone's really dumb. I mean, like what he says, I think over and over again, and these are his words, I didn't give this to him, but I think his testimony has kind of been, you all seem like really important people, and I like to think that you have better things to do than talk about whether or not I play a game with my friends.
Right.
Yeah.
Are you? What's the timeline of this bill? And if it passes, are you considering moving out of Missouri?
So right now, we're on spring break this week, and so we're all breathing a little bit smoother, a little easier. So the healthcare ban came up on the Senate floor. Like I said, they all had made it out of committee. It was brought to the Senate floor actually on Tuesday last week, which was Purim, which was like a really funny way for me to celebrate Purim, kind of like, on the one hand, really feeling like here's this holiday that's talking about feeling powerless in the face of overwhelmingly powerful people trying to destroy you. And I just felt like, oh man, there's supposed to be a hope at the end of this, but I'm not getting to that part. And then by the end of the day, the Democrats had started filibustering. And I just remember thinking, a couple of people standing up when it seems like there's no hope is maybe the exact message of Purim. And so that's why I really remember that that's when it started. The Democrats filibustered on Tuesday, they filibustered on Wednesday, and we had clergy that were there on Wednesday participating in a prayer vigil while the filibuster was going on, and had been planning to go all through the night and all through Thursday. And then at the end of the day on Wednesday, a little bit before 5 o'clock, the Senate recessed for a half hour. They ended up coming back an hour later and then ended up adjourning a day early for spring break. So that was a really nice turn, because there was a real big push to try to exhaust the filibuster and to try to get a vote. The bill sponsors were really upset about it. It's hopefully bought some more time for a deal. So we know the bills are going to pass in Missouri. We just don't know what version of the bills are going to pass and how difficult it's going to make life in Missouri. And so we're waiting to find out what it is that's going to pass, and then whether or not, on the one hand, I want to say, like, we've always been people who have stayed and fought and stood up for what we believe in. It's very different as a parent to force your child into that position. And so the question for us is really going to be, how untenable is life going to be for our family? Because if we can stay and fight, that's what we're going to do. But if I think that it's unsafe for my child, then that's my first priority.
I can't even imagine what it's like for, as a parent, having to justify your child's humanity day to day. And I would imagine a lot of these conversations that you're having with lawmakers are with sympathetic audiences. But I'm curious if you've found any line or way of reasoning with people who don't necessarily agree with your position on gender affirming care or on trans kids in sports. Has there been anything that's been effective at really changing minds that you've found so far?
I want to really, it's hard to answer that question, although I will, but it's hard to answer it in the sense that we're not actually dealing with people who are voting purely their conscience on this. We can't ignore the fact in this conversation that this is a politically motivated argument that is largely coming from a national agenda through all of our states. And so more than anything, it's not so much that I've changed minds, although maybe we have, but that we have people that I'll meet with who will say, I know these bills are ridiculous. I don't actually think, like, I wish we were talking about these other things that are my priority, but I can't publicly vote against it. And we've had individuals who have been working behind the scenes. So I'm going to vote it out of committee, but I know that so-and-so will never bring it to the Senate floor. Or I'll vote it out of committee, but I know that so-and-so will filibuster. Or I know, whatever it is, there's a lot of people who, when you have a one-on-one conversation, will acknowledge the harm that they know this will do. But because they're running for re-election, because they're looking to seek higher office, feel like it's not politically advantageous to speak out on what they know is right. And that's what I find so hurtful. So yes, it is so difficult as a parent to have to defend my child's humanity. But what's more painful are the people who have decided that my child's humanity is something that they can sacrifice for their own political gain. That's really what makes this just indescribable. With all of that said, as we talk to people, the biggest thing has been the face-to-face interactions. It's more and more people getting to know my kid. And so we try to be there. He's really good also at telling stories about himself when he testifies. So they've started, I mean, it's been 4 years. They've seen him grow up from 8 to almost 12. So, you know, these are really formative years. And he talks about the fact that he rides a unicycle, and he talks about the fact that he's an avid reader in some of his favorite books. And he talks about when he was learning to walk and then ride his unicycle on a high wire, which was terrifying as a parent. You know, so there's all these things that are really personalized. But then, yeah, he goes in and he goes in their offices and he sits and he chats, and it's really easy to demonize the person you don't know. It's much harder when the people are sitting across from you. And we are just there consistently. I don't yell at lawmakers. I meet with them. I talk to them as faith leader to faith leader. So we'll talk Bible verses together. And sometimes we did one recently where we were talking and we were having, I thought, like this really great conversation. He said he was never going to agree with me, but he was really appreciating engaging. And I don't remember now what he brought up or what I brought up, but at some point, I think I asked him, like, what do you hope is accomplished from all of this? And he said, I want everyone to feel good. I want everyone to feel like the body that God gave them is the right body, like that's their body that they're supposed to have. And I said, yeah, well, God gives us all a body. And then sometimes we step in and we have to heal parts of the body that get broken, and we have to fix parts of the body. And that's also because God gave us science, and God gave us medicine, and God gave us physicians who are able to do all of these things. And I think that's just as much a part of what God gave us. And that he got mad at, that he started to say, like, there's nothing godlike about this. And that sort of shut down the conversation. But usually it's really a lot of like, we just want to show you that this is who we are. We want to tell you we're happy to answer questions. And for the people who have become more sympathetic to us, who are publicly still supportive of these bills, I think they just feel like a personal connection. They like us. We're nice people when we come in. You know, my son will draw pictures or tell funny jokes or whatever it is. But it's been just as much work on the Democrat side, by the way. Like, if we talk about this as sort of a policy position in the Republican Party, but Democrats have kind of pushed this as a policy position to fight against the trans bills, but it also doesn't mean that everyone in the Democratic Party is supportive.
Right.
And so a lot of our work is sometimes also meeting with Democrats to say, when it comes time to filibuster or to stand up, we need you to do it, and we need you to be willing to maybe risk some of your other bills or go all night and let us show you what's at stake. And so we spend just as much, if not maybe more time in those offices, building the relationships and just saying, please learn who we are, and just know that, you know, we need you, and we want you to care about who we are, and we want you to care about us.
Yeah. This has been fantastic. I'm so glad you were able to come on today and share all this information. I just put in the comments for people who are interested. You were featured in a story in the New York Times and the Washington Post. I just put the links to those stories in the comments. If people want to follow you and follow this story, where can they follow you? On Twitter?
Yeah, mostly I've been doing updates on Twitter. It's at Rory PN, and that's where I tend to put most of the updates as they're happening, and sometimes live tweeting from Jefferson City when we go there.
Oh, wow. Okay, great. Well, Rory, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been great.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Wow. I mean, that's so difficult. You know, it's one thing to talk about issues, you know, in the abstract, but when you have a child who's suffering, it adds a whole other level.
Yeah. And I mean, something that Rory was getting at about, there's just a lot of people that aren't around transgender people or youth, and that personal connection really can change people's hearts about an issue, even if they won't change their minds. And I was thinking of, you know, there was, I think, yet another study that came out yesterday about how many Americans have never met a Jew before, which is crazy to me.
Yeah.
But I mean, not everyone lives in New York. But yeah, it's.
Yeah, they probably met a Jew. I mean, they have a doctor, they have an accountant. They just probably didn't realize that
Come
person was
on,
Jewish.
Come on, Benjamin. Genetic stereotypes at forward.com.
Right. forward.com/stereotypes. I know you got to get to. You're always getting on the road after these recordings.
I know. That's the benefit of being unpartnered and without children, as you can just go.
And working remotely,
Working remotely, it's wonderful. But we have a Nudnik of the week who is not new to Forward readers, right? What is our favorite friend, Representative George Santos, up to right now?
George Santos, you love him, you hate him. The embattled Republican from New York who lied his way into office with a lot of his professional biography, and to our readers know his personal biography as well, lying about that he had grandparents who had escaped the Nazis, and the fact that he was Jewish but not really Jewish. So he had, a lot of people have been asking him for him to resign, and he even has said, "I'm just going to be a one-term guy. Don't worry, I'm not going to be around that long." And yet. You should never believe anything Santos says.
Politicians in general, but especially this one. Yeah.
This week, the New York Times reported that Representative George Santos has filed paperwork indicating his intent to run for re-election. Now, I should point out, it doesn't mean he's going to run. What it does mean is that it's kind of a legal loophole. It allows him to continue fundraising and to spend money that he already has as campaign funds. So it may just be
him
his
to
way.
use a legal loophole this time, given his history of illegal loopholes. I mean, I can't remember which of the bajillion articles this week I was reading about him, but apparently he taught a lot of people how to run like credit card schemes. Like,
Oh yeah, fraud schemes. Yeah.
not a good guy. Not a good
Yeah,
guy.
they were going to ATMs and he was showing people. He was showing them how to like steal the numbers off of ATM machines. Yeah.
It's a big
Skimming,
Jewish
I think it's called.
principle to judge people favorably, but I don't see it with this one. But
So Representative George Santos is our Nudnik of the week.
yes,
Do you have a
to be
do you have a
seen.
nominee for Tzadik or Sadakis of the
Yeah,
week?
we've got a couple. Jamie Lee Curtis surprisingly won her first Oscar, which is wild for me, for her role as an IRS auditor in Everything Everywhere. She is also in the process of restoring her grandparents' home synagogue in Hungary.
Wow.
I think you know more about her than I do since you compiled a lot of these factoids, but it was just a beautiful moment to see like a beloved, for me, an actress or actor that I've watched for so long, like finally get the credit. There were a lot of women finally getting the credit that they deserve at this round of Oscars. So it's beautiful to see.
My nomination for Sadakis of the week is it's funny we're recording this right now around lunchtime on Thursday. The March Madness, that's the college basketball tournament, is literally starting right now. My beloved West Virginia University Mountaineers, as soon as we get off this call, I'm going to turn on the TV because they have just started their first game against Alabama. And so we actually did it. We posted a story this week about the University of Maryland's women's basketball team. And the star point guard on that team is a Jewish athlete named Abby Myers. And so if you go to forward.com and just search for Abby Myers, University of Maryland, you'll see this article we posted about her. And, you know, she credits, I think, a very formative trip to Israel when she played in the Maccabiah games a few years ago as kind of giving her confidence to play in the big leagues. So we're wishing Abby Myers, I think her first game is tomorrow. So we're wishing her the best in the March Madness tournament.
Very exciting. Well, I don't want to get between you and your sports, Benyamin.
My
So,
sports. Yeah.
Right?
All right. Well, Laura, as always, this has been great. I'm glad we get to catch up like this each week. Have a safe trip to Philly. Hopefully you'll find some good food to eat when you're there.
Yeah, I'll let you know at our catch up next week.
All right. Take care.
Bye, Benyamin.